going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JAR. JAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and this is our, well, it's definitely not weekly anymore, but this is our show where we review the Magic stories. It's been a little bit, but this week we are back with more, that's right, more Battle for Zendikar / Oath of the Gatewatch stories with Beneath the Surface by Ari Levitch. So, I guess we can give a bit of an explanation, then we'll give our quick reviews and we'll go into the whole thing. I don't want to make a big deal out of this because if you're watching this in order, this will make no sense to you. But if you're watching this in Battle for Zendikar, Oath of the Gatewatch order. But we took a huge break. And by break, I mean we worked our asses off because we had to cover the Innistrad Midnight Hunt stories, the Innistrad Crimson Vow stories, the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty stories, the Streets of New Capenna stories, and everything in between. So there was a huge break there in us covering these stories, not just, not doing anything at all. And so we're now back after all of those and before Dominaria United stories start to hopefully finish these off. There's like 4 left. So it kind of sucked that we had to stop right before the end, but now we are hopefully going strong to the finish line. So definitely stay tuned for that. Thank you for your patience if you are watching this in real time as opposed to, from some playlist later on. So thank you very much. My quick review at the start, by the way, is, I thought the story was cool. I definitely don't think that, it's like an instant classic or like one of my favorites of all time, but I thought it was a fine read. I enjoyed the time that I spent reading it. And so, yeah, it was a good story.
Yeah, it was fine. It was an Ari Levitch story.
Correct.
So I kind of expected it to be better than I feel like it ultimately was.
Okay.
I don't know. It was fine.
I will say, and this kind of goes in the full review itself, but also isn't spoilery in any way, there were a lot of instances, I didn't write any of them down, I felt like it would be a little petty, but there were a lot of instances in this story, and I think I covered it up while I was reading it out loud, but a lot of instances of this story with just words were missing. Like transitionary words here and there in a sentence, just flat out missing. So it's possible that it just wasn't properly proofread, and that's why the words, because it was very obvious, right? I did not meticulously pick over this. It was just reading through it. It was like, oh, there should be this transitionary word there, which, as I implied, when I read it out loud, I just put it there because it made sense to put it there. But many, many times there was just a word missing, and it was very strange to me. So
I think that's just indicative of either a rush job or it's indicative of the fact that it wasn't proofread and or that the person writing it was being rushed.
Sure.
Yeah,
it's
so
definitely...
it's either a rush job where everybody is okay, let's just throw this together.
Yeah, push it out.
Or it's here's one person kind of being bullied to, get the thing done sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So, sorry, we're a little discombobulated, but I wanted to mention that because it was relevant to what Amy was just saying. But if you have not gotten a chance to read the story for yourself, or honestly, if it's been a while since you've read it, the top link in the description down below will take you to the story so you can read it for yourself if that's something that you're interested in doing now that we've given you our quick review. If it's something that you want to check out, we try to remove as many barriers as possible, so that link right there will take you there. You don't have to worry about trying to search through the story page, although credit where credit is due, it is relatively easy to find on the story page if you follow the right tracks and kind of know where to look. The links and stuff, the story page is working, and so it is nice.
Once.
Yeah, well, that's why I give credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
The story page is there, it is easily findable, but to make it even easier, down in the description box below is that link for you. So feel free to go read the story for yourself. And then, of course, after you're done, we would love it if you would come back here and join us and give us your opinions and then give us your thoughts on our opinions as well, because that's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So before we get on to the full review itself, just a quick reminder. Hi, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. If you're enjoying anything and everything that we're doing here on this Geek for All family of channels, we'll say it again later, please feel free to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out. More of this series in the coming weeks. more of our streams every time we go live, which is, by the way, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, again, right here on this channel. We have other channels as well in Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All, linked down in the description box below. In fact, if you check Gluten Free for All and you subscribe and ring the bell, then tomorrow you might get a little bit of a surprise. So just be aware of that. But yes, this is, and then Mondays, if you're a fan of Magic the Gathering, we play MTG Arena live at 8 p.m. Eastern. That's what we do then. Mostly limited. Recently we've been doing some, our community has very much been interested in doing Brawl games. So mostly historic Brawl, if I recall correctly. So we've been doing some of those here and there, but it's mostly limited as well. Draft, sealed, whatever happens to be the most current limited format at the time is what we typically play. And then on Fridays, we're playing whatever video game we happen to be playing at the time. This Friday, we are continuing at 8 p.m. Eastern, our first ever Nuzlocke of Pokemon Fire Red. If you are not familiar with what that is, come check it out. We'd love to explain it to you. And if you do know what that is and it sounds interesting to you, we'd love to have you join us.
Yes.
Whatever stream you come to, chat is always bumping. We got an amazing crew of folks over there.
We really do.
And Amy does a really great job of talking to all of you and making sure that you're all doing well while I waffle around doing whatever it is that I'm doing at any given time. So
I'm very grateful for our community over there.
Agreed. Awesome folks, and we would love to have you be one of those people and join us. So please feel free to do so, like I said, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. But now that that is all out of the way, thank you for letting us do that. Also, I guess last thing, if you are enjoying anything that we're doing, likes and shares, videos, streams, etc., goes a very long way, and we really, really appreciate it. So thank you. So on to the full review itself. I thought that it was interesting. A lot of times at the beginning of these stories, and by these I mean Battle for Zendikar, Oath of the Gatewatch stories, or like stories back then, they give a little like italicized paragraph in the beginning, which is just like a bit of a recap for folks who may not have been following along the whole time. And this week, or this story, had a brief section talking about Jorian seeing Kozilek rise. Now, one thing that got very old when we read these stories was that every story following Kozilek rising was talking about Kozilek rising. Remember that? Like, Kozilek rose out of the ground, and then it was like, now that Kozilek has risen out of the ground, let's talk about what Gideon was thinking when Kozilek rose out of the ground and what happened for him. Now let's look at it from Jace's perspective. Now Jorian's perspective. Now Kiora's perspective. Now, like, Tazri's perspective. Now Ob Nixilis's and Chandra's perspective. It was like, for the next, like, 5 weeks, it was like, hey, by the way, did you remember that this happened? Because this happened.
Right.
It's like, yes, I did. I've seen the picture.
We're going to tell you what everybody thought and did when it happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody.
Yeah.
But not in one story, in a separate story for each of them.
Yes. And so I thought that that was very interesting because this section in the beginning that was italicized, I was like, oh, sweet. Okay, so this is where we're getting it, and that's perfect because it was among other different things, so I really liked that. And then later on in the story, they just told it to us anyway.
Yeah.
Which I was like, oh, okay, so then why, like, she literally, like, in a flashback tells her recounts what she saw when Kozilek rose and hit the thing and knocked her off and blah blah blah, and it was like, I was just happy with what you did because you didn't take us through this again for Jorian's perspective, and now you've taken us through it for okay, sure, whatever, great. I was like, all right, yep, very annoying. And then there was even something in there, I'm not going to remember it exactly because I didn't write it down, but there was something else in that italicized portion that like talked about, and then Jorian did this thing, or did it in this way, and felt this way. And I was like, okay, that's a recap, so it's letting us know how Jorian felt, what she was thinking, etc. Later on in this story, in the main story, word for word, it told us that same thing again. And I was like, the whole point of putting it in the italics in the beginning is either so you don't have to tell us that or because you're reminding us of that.
Right.
But either way, you've already done it. So why do it again in the story? And then either that, or if you're doing it in the story, you don't need it in the recap in the beginning.
Right.
It just was very confusing to me because it was like you recounted the entire Kozilek Rising thing for Jorian. So you didn't need that in there. That wasn't something that you needed to recap for us because the story was going to do that anyway. And then that like moment where you kind of talked about her motivations or whatever it was, you then tell us that exact motivation word for word later on in the story. So it like almost negated the entirety of that italicized paragraph. I just didn't understand the purpose of it.
I wonder if I'm starting to get the sense that maybe this story wasn't supposed to be a separate story.
I mean, it was long
supposed
enough
to
to
be like part of another story, and they needed to cut that story shorter, or felt that they needed to. So then they took some of that story away and tried to make it into a separate story that kind of feels incomplete, or like they tried to bolster it, kind of.
So, I mean, this is...
like saying things multiple times that didn't really need to be said or whatever.
So, I mean, this is pure speculation, but I do recall at this time, I believe, this is a very long time ago, but I believe this was at a time where the stories were every week. Every week. So if you needed to fill a slot, because you were like, oh God, we don't have anything this week,
right.
What the hell are we going to do? Maybe that's what occurred. I mean, this story was definitely long enough to be its own.
Sure.
But if you're kind of combining your theory of the rush job with the fact that it was kind of, it seems like maybe it wasn't supposed to be in there, and so they ended up repeating themselves because they didn't really have time to like go over it or whatever. That's possible. You know, maybe that's, we've talked about this before, like that's our tinfoil hat thought for the day kind of a thing. I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was long enough, but if you cut out all the unnecessary BS, is it? Like,
to play devil's advocate slightly, I would say that you could probably say that about any story. Like that there are plenty, or not any, but there are plenty of stories that could be said for. I don't know. That's just how I feel.
Bad stories, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But I still appreciate it. Something that we ended up talking about at
I
the
don't think it's a bad story, though.
I
just
agree.
think
Agree.
It's just a meh story.
Something that we talked about in the beginning, Kiora, sorry, she's in this story too. Jorian ends up in the water, or is in the water, and like awakens to find that she's in the water, and she's having trouble breathing because there's a lot of detritus in the water. There's a lot of stuff and she's not really able to get oxygen through her gills, or enough oxygen through her gills, and needs to find her way to the surface. And one of the things that she discusses that you ended up kind of keying in on was the smell of death in the water.
Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted to talk about that at all.
Oh, no. No, because I was trying to understand why there was a smell of death, because at first I thought it was a Kozilek thing, and so we were talking about Kozilek.
Sure, but I think that's an intriguing point to bring up, right? Because it was something that we talked about. We hear about the smell of death, and it's like, but Kozilek rose out of the ground, and like there's the Kozilek distortion, and then Ulamog's walking around, so there's all the chalkiness, like, so why? And later on it explains it to you, right? So in that moment where it's there, that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask of like, why is she smelling death? What's dead, right? When Ulamog walks through, any living matter, any organic matter, be it, you know, human, humanoid, or plant, is gone. It's not like withered on the ground or whatever. It's just gone. And there's just chalkiness left in Ulamog's wake.
So it doesn't smell like those things are dead or rotting. It only smells like the chalkiness.
Yep. Yeah, and feels like that, right? It, like,
right.
You know, you can kind of like almost sense the deadness in the air around you. But again, not like decaying death, just like devoid, like the voidness of everything. So I still thought it was a relevant thing to bring up. Because
they said that first, but that it took them a while to explain it.
Yes, because
then it was just, you know, all the sea creatures that ended up dying when Kiora was attempting to fight Kozilek and failing.
Yes, with Lorthos and company, if you will. Yeah, and the fact that did not work out in anyone's favor besides Kozilek's. I also know we both enjoyed the line because there was like so many. There were so many dead creatures, krakens, octopi, or like giant squid, whales, etc. Right? They didn't mention every single thing, but those were some of the things that were brought up. And they mentioned that Kiora is trying to find the surface, and she's doing so through a tangle of meat.
Yeah.
Amazing. What a great word, or set of words, of course, to describe what she was going through. That's just so cool to me.
I thought it was gross. That depersonalizes it, you know. And then to come back and try to like give it all this credence afterward and be like, she screamed because she like couldn't handle it, and it's like, okay, but like there's a disconnect between those two things, and they didn't connect them.
Oh, interesting.
Like they just left it like that in my mind. Like that's why I was asking you about it, because I was like, wait a minute, hold on here. She's like, I'm tangled in meat, you know. So she's like saying how unimportant these creatures were as she's referring to them in that capacity. And then as she's screaming and freaking out about it, it's completely flip-flopped. And there was nothing in between. I felt like it was missing her brain goes from I'm tangled in meat to now all of a sudden I really care about this. You know, I just felt like those two things weren't connected. They didn't do a good enough job to describe the distance between them.
Okay. I took that an entirely different way.
Oh, really?
Yes. When she comes when she's in the water, she's fighting to get to the surface. She's fighting to breathe. Now, she came to and was unaware of how long she'd been out. So she's not necessarily underneath Lorthos in that moment, right? If she was, maybe she would have been able to say, this is Lorthos, and like given him a name, or a name enough to have cared that much about it. But if it's just sea creatures, like sure, they lost their life fighting Kozilek and or Ulamog just like anything else did, but to her, she's fighting to the surface to try to breathe. Then once she gets to the surface and is kind of running along or walking along or crawling along, these bodies, these dead bodies that are just floating in the water of these sea creatures, she yells not because of the dead bodies, although I guess that's part of it. She yells because she looks up at Seagate, which we have heard all throughout these stories is Zendikar's symbol of togetherness, and it's where they had their meeting. All these leaders of Zendikar and all these planeswalkers had their meeting of how are we going to fight these giant Eldrazi Titans, or this giant Eldrazi, they didn't know about Kozilek at the time, but this Eldrazi Titan. How are we going to take it down? How are we going to stop these spawn and this big one and save our plane of Zendikar, our home, our world, and what are we going to do about it? And they devised a plan and it worked. And then as soon as it worked and they start rejoicing, Kozilek pops up and destroys everything.
Right.
And then Seagate is destroyed, the symbol of the plane coming together, everyone working as one. And now even that symbol has been destroyed. A hole has been punched in it. There's distortion everywhere. And that's why she screams. Because there was just this massive roller coaster of emotions of, oh my God, we're all going to die. Hey, I've met these people. We're actually going to do it. I've built up some hope, but there's still some trepidation in there. Oh my God, we actually did it. Holy crap, what the hell is that? Now I'm in the water. Will I even survive? Gets out of the water, finally breathes and lives, which is a stressful thing in and of itself, and then realizes
an
that...
unlikely thing.
Right. And then realizes that their symbol is gone, and all of this while she is on the corpses of all of these sea creatures that Kiora, who also fell and failed, tried to bring up to help everyone. And it didn't work for anyone's benefit. So that's what I took that part as. I mean, I can see where you're coming from with that. That's just not how I took it.
Okay.
Personally.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt like the Seagate part was a separate part, but
Okay.
I don't know.
Maybe they brought it up later, and so that's where the confusion came from.
I don't know. Maybe it's just that I was a little too jaded because, like, we've been through this already.
Sure.
Like, I already knew what was gonna happen. So I don't know. Maybe. So I was like, yeah. So what? Like Seagate always gets destroyed, and then But like
it'll get restored. They'll beat
right.
the Titans. Everybody relax.
So like and I'm tired of hearing how important it is for this like bridge thing to be intact because it feels like it never is. But I understand that that's just how I feel about it. It is intact most of the time.
Okay.
And these people do find it to be extremely important for it to be intact.
Sure.
And therefore, I need to understand that and get out of my own head enough to get in their shoes for that portion as well.
Okay, fair enough. I will say, I thought it was really great. I mentioned that Kiora is in this story. And last time that we saw Kiora, I thought it was very interesting because I thought that would be the last time that we saw Kiora. She had lost to Kozilek, she had lost the Bident, and she was just kind of falling into the dark waters, or sinking deeper into the dark waters. And it was like, wow, are we really going to next see her in War of the Spark? And like, that's how we find out that she's alive?
Right.
But no, thankfully not.
Of course, we were already through to War of the Spark, so we already knew that she was alive.
Right.
But after that story, you're thinking she's dead,
right?
But we're like, okay, but she's alive, so how are they going to make that work?
And again, speaking of jaded, I feel like that's something that happens a lot these days. Is that like something cliffhangery happens with a planeswalker, and then 6 months go by, 2 years go by, and you haven't heard anything for them or from them or about them, and yet you're supposed to care when they show up again.
Right.
Like, to me, that's annoying. I don't appreciate that as much with the way that the Magic stories work, right? Like,
I think that's kind of their way of like trying to get away from the whole we only care about the Gatewatch thing. Where they're trying to focus on like different people, not just the Gatewatch. And there's no way to, there's no way to like keep with those same characters and yet please the people who don't want to keep with the same characters,
Okay, sure. So, I mean, I was really happy to see Kiora because, like I said, I really thought that was going to be the last time we were going to see her.
Right.
Because, again, I'm kind of looking through the rose-colored glasses of modern-day era Magic stories as opposed to these Magic stories where they do give you kind of the encapsulation of a character's arc all in one story, as opposed to, well, you're going to have to stay tuned.
Right.
I do not like that. But something that you were very, if you'll allow me to say, something that you were very frustrated by was Kiora. The whole point of the rest of this story, now that Kiora has been found, and Jorian kind of sets her leg. God, I like compound fractures, which if people are unaware, a compound fracture is when the bone breaks and penetrates the skin or protrudes through the skin in the process. Compound fractures are disgusting to me. I do not like it. I talked on a recent stream about the fact that I used to be trained in CPR, AED usage, and basic first aid. Compound fractures are so gross to me. It's something that bothers me that it's so gross, but I can't help it. So that was a little much when they were talking about like having to pull the bottom part of the leg until the bone popped, came back inside the skin, and then she was able to set it, and Kiora healed herself, and
I didn't care.
Ooh, too much. No, not me. I think I get that from my father. I think.
Oh, really?
I think so. I think that's a him and I kind of a thing. Because my mom doesn't. My mom doesn't care about that kind of stuff. She watches surgeries and stuff. No, thank you. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't care about any of it.
But so what the rest of the story is about, once Jorian saves Kiora, is Jorian joining with Kiora to seek out the Bident. Because the Bident's gone. Kiora is very upset about that. My Bident's gone, I lost the Bident, blah, blah, blah. And that's like kind of all she's talking about. And Jorian's like, all right, I mean, I guess I'll go with you to find it. And like,
go get it.
right. And even at one point, Jorian's like, I don't know why I came with her. Like, she knows where it is. Why am I here? Right? Because
To help Kiora get through it.
well, she just didn't know that
Right.
at the time. But yes, absolutely, that turns out to be why. Because, for example, I'll skip this for a moment and talk about this quote that you wanted me to write down, and then we can talk about the quote. Panic was never helpful. It was the sum of helplessness, fear, and desperation, all braided together.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that there's ever been a truer statement.
I just liked the dichotomy of the concept of panic in the story, because, like you talked about, when Jorian came to the surface and is on top of this like massive dead bodies and yells, just screams as loud as she possibly can because she's just so distraught and panicked over what has happened, and she has no idea what she's going to do next. Except, sorry, she knows what she's going to do next. It's nothing. Because she feels that there is nothing that she can do. There's nothing that she can do. There's nothing that will allow her to succeed. Like, she feels like she has failed. And Kiora...
Right, their best efforts failed.
And Kiora eventually says to her, well, what do you want to do? You want to just crawl in, like, find a hole somewhere, hide, and just wait to die?
Yeah.
And Jorian was like, I mean, for a moment there, I kind of did. You know, like to herself, right? She doesn't tell Kiora. But like to herself, she's like, yeah, I guess I did for a moment there. Because she felt helpless. She felt like there truly was nothing else that could be done. And she was at the end of her rope. She was like, okay, I guess that's it then. What else could I possibly do? What else could we possibly do? And even with the we, as far as she was concerned, when she came to the surface, she may have been the only living thing left on the plane.
Yeah.
Right? How did she know? There's all these dead bodies. Seagate's been destroyed. All the people that were there, she doesn't hear any of them. And she doesn't regain herself mentally until she hears the word help.
Right.
Because then there's something for her to do again.
Right.
And so she goes. But now that line, panic was never helpful. It was the sum of helplessness, fear, and desperation all braided together, was Jorian's realization. Right? She's not saying that out loud, but still, it's her realization with regard to Kiora. Because now that Jorian has found Kiora, Kiora is the one who's like, but the Biden's gone.
Right.
That's it. The Biden's gone. It abandoned me in my time of need, and it
Right.
didn't work, and it's gone.
And the thing is, I think Jorian's time in panic allowed her to like go through that for long enough that then after the fact she was able to help Kiora, and maybe like have enough sort of wisdom at that point to be able to say like, or at least to be able to convey somehow to the audience and make the audience think
Sure.
that, okay, what is happening here is we're seeing like each person's sort of individual, like between this story and the last couple stories or whatever, what we were seeing was like each individual's sort of thing that they clung to. Like, this is what's going to save us, right? This one thing. You know, and each person kind of had their own thing that they clung to.
Mm-hmm.
That they thought was going to actually help them out of this insurmountable situation.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think by the time we get here in this story, we're able to kind of look back on them all and go, yeah, okay. They're panicked, clinging to these things that they thought were going to save them. You know, not that it was for nothing, but those things that they were clinging to were obviously not the things that were going to save them.
Right.
The things that were going to save them was going to be all their numbers.
Yeah.
Banding together and working together and not panicking, and not clinging to things that weren't really going to help them, and just focusing on doing what they were actually capable of doing and doing it together,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And then, speaking of clinging to it, something that you kind of got annoyed by partway through was once Kiora somewhat snapped out of it, at least initially, and they actually started going to look for the Bident, Kiora just kept saying, well, I mean, we're like in a bit of a situation now, but I mean, the Bident would get us out of it. And like...
It's like we're going to get the Bident. Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. No, what I was actually pissed off about was that she kept calling it her Bident.
That's true. Yeah, that's right.
It's not yours. You stole it from a god.
Yep.
Because you thought you were better than the god.
Yep.
And now, look at you.
Well, and like, I have to say, I guess I'm talking about myself a lot. What a surprise. Can you tell that I'm an only child? I am not typically, like, I have a bit of, it's not really claustrophobia, or at least I don't typically call it claustrophobia, but when I am having trouble catching my breath, if I'm in an enclosed space, that bothers me, mainly because I just feel like I can't get enough oxygen. Maybe that just is claustrophobia, maybe I'm just wrong, but it's only when I'm like out of breath to begin with. If I'm in an enclosed space, but I'm like calm and breathing fine, no issues whatsoever. But if I go in there and I am out of breath, then I feel like I'm never gonna catch my breath and I'm just gonna like pass out or something. So the story that was being told here of them crawling through those caverns and like Jorian like getting on her back and like reaching up and like pulling themselves through and like having to expel all the air out of their lungs so that they could pull themselves through and fit through that hole. Nope. That is terrifying to me. No, thank you.
I will say, like, when I was younger, particularly a kid, and I was very small, and I could fit in places that other people couldn't fit. And that was a thing that was fun for me to do. But as you get older and bigger, that stops being a fun thing for you to do. Especially if it means you have to expel all the air from your lungs without necessarily knowing at which point you'll be able to put the air back in.
No, thank you.
That is terrifying.
No thanks, I'll
because
pass.
all that really means is that you're not sure you're going to survive this.
Nope. No, I hated it. Oh, God. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I will say, and this is not a criticism, at least I don't think it is, I think that if that portion of the story were described a little bit more vividly, I would have had a real issue reading it. I think like it was mentioned at one point of like, oh, Jorian's back is up against the stone and scraping it, and like she's scraping her ear against it and stuff like that. But I feel like it wasn't enough in that spot, in that exact spot where she has to expel the air and pull. Like I didn't have enough of a mental image of that to have personally been panicked by it. Like I was okay reading it, etc. But like I said, I feel like if it was done a little bit more intensely, holy crap, I would have had a huge problem with that. Oh man, yeah, big problem.
I can see that. I don't think I would have, because I was separated enough from it, like just hearing you read it, and not having to be there myself. But if I was there myself, it would have been a problem for sure.
Yeah. Another quote that you wanted me to write down, which I agree we should have written down so we could talk about, discussing Kiora. She was a master of the colossal, at home among gods, and this was too much for her.
Yeah.
Now, this is the squeezing through the tight spaces that we were just talking about. And so, again, I'll let you take it away first, because that was something
Right,
I
I mean-
wanted to write down.
That's a cool statement to me because it says, like, everybody is good at something and everybody is bad at something. And everybody is mediocre at most things, right? So, you know, and sometimes some people just aren't great at anything. You know, they're just good at everything.
Jack of
you
all
know?
trades, master of none.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, admirable as well. But I think the point is, like, I think Jorianne here was thinking that because she was like, whoa, like, there's really something to be said about the fact that she is such a sort of powerhouse of her own. And then to do this is so difficult for her. And it really, like, gives me perspective. But I kind of feel like it's just more of a picture of the reality of what it means to just, you know, be a person. And the fact that, you know, and particularly, I think, if you're, I mean, Kiora is not herself big, but if you're big or you're about doing things big or about doing things with other big people and stuff like that, you're not necessarily suited for making yourself real tiny and shoving yourself in a tiny hole.
Yeah.
You know, that's just the way it is. And Jorianne kept talking about how that's her thing, right? But I feel like she wasn't really saying here, like, oh, okay, I'm here to help Kiora get through this because this is my thing.
Right.
And she's out of her element. And so I'm here to make sure that she's taken care of in this situation. And I feel like they could have said that. They could have elaborated on that. They could have made that realization be what happened to Jorianne here. And instead what they did was, well, she's this big hotshot and she can't do this, you know, even though this is my thing. Well, you know, so I don't know. I feel like it was a little more like knocking her off of her high horse kind of thing, as opposed to being what I feel like it should have been or could have been.
See, and I took it as Jorianne was panicked in the beginning. Then she found her thing to focus on, which is ruin diving or ruin seeking and looking for this object in the ruins. And Kiora was then out of her depth in that moment because of it. But
Oh, they were both in the depths.
Jesus. But once Jorianne started asking Kiora about the Bident, she was like, tell me about the Bident. Tell me where it is. Then Kiora was able to kind of go into herself, feel for where the Bident was, and then tell Jorianne where the Bident was. Oh, it's not moving right now, but it was, and now it is. Oh, it's moving towards the surface. And when Kiora was talking about that, Jorianne could hear some enthusiasm back in her voice again. Or like as opposed to the monotone, the Bident left me, it's gone. It left me,
Right.
I needed it. It abandoned me. Why did it abandon me? You know, now it's like, oh, it's going that way. I found it. And like Jorianne said, the Bident, I was about to say Thassa. Holy crap. Kiora is an expert on the Bident. Jorianne is an expert in the ruins, or in seeking things and crawling through and getting through tight spaces. And so Jorian was able to use the ruins, or going through the ruins, as her thing to focus herself on. So that she wasn't too panicked about, oh my god, there's nothing we can do, blah, blah, blah. And then she was able to focus Kiora on the thing that she was interested in, the thing that she could get through. And the only thing that I could think of when reading it is, it's like, we have worked at camps for many different years, or many years, and worked with kids who sometimes tend to be homesick. Excuse me. I myself was a homesick camper one summer, and only one summer, thankfully, because I worked there for 10 years after that, so it's a good thing. But I know that when you're talking to a homesick kid, what do? Well, you don't talk to them about home, and you don't let them sit there and wallow. You talk to them about other things. You distract them with other things by talking to them about, hey, guess what cool thing we're going to do tomorrow?
Right.
This is the cool thing we're going to do tomorrow. And so you distract them.
2 days from now.
Yes.
When you're definitely still going to be here.
Yes.
Yep.
So you have to stay
and
here.
you're going to really want to because of that thing.
Yep. And you don't need to call mom or dad or both. You just need to relax.
Right.
Get ready for bed, etc. The other thing I found, by the way, if people are curious about this, from my experience as a homesick kid versus then going back and having the time of my life and wanting to keep going back summer after summer after summer, tire the kids out. Because then at night, they don't have time to think about, oh, but I miss my mom and dad, or I miss this person, or I miss home, or whatever. They don't have time. They're exhausted. So they just want to go to bed, and then again, wake up the next day to do more fun things, and then get to bed the next night exhausted as well. That is what I found. It works for me. It may not work for everybody else, but just saying. But that's what I thought of here. When Kiora's like, I can't do this, Jorian. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't stay here, right? I can't stay here. I want to go home. Well, talk to me about the Bident. Tell me about the Bident instead. Don't talk to me about how tight of a fit this is and how you can't force yourself through. Tell me where the Bident is.
Right.
Let's focus on that. One thing at a time, right? That was brilliant, because that's just the thing. That's just how it works. That's how you deal with little homesick kids. It's how you deal with people who are panicking, right? You talk to them about something else, right? We're not in a life or death situation. Tell me about your likes and your dislikes, your interests, etc. Talk to me about the Bident, right? I loved that. I thought that was really great. To contrast what I was, you're cool with moving on from that topic? Okay. I wanted to make sure I didn't cut you off or something. Contrasting with what I said before about how kind of crawling through that space would have freaked me out a lot more if there was a better, not a better description, but a more in-depth description of that point. To contrast that, later on, there is an amazing description of when Jorian is crawling through that tight space, and she had heard skittering. So she had snuffed her torch, and she's going through in the dark. And as she's going through in the dark, she touches something, and it's slimy. And so she pulls back quickly.
Right.
And then she's like, this is stupid. Why did I not have my torch on? So she relights her torch and then sees the bony carapaces, the tentacles, the bodies, or the presence of Eldrazi spawn. A lot of them. To the point where she is on top of them. She's laying on them. And in her light, with the way that torchlight works, it looks like they're moving. It looks like they're writhing underneath her. Until she realizes that they're all dead.
Yeah.
But until she realizes...
Thankfully.
Yes. But until she realizes that they're all dead, you and I are both sitting there like, nope. No. Because it was a very good description.
Yeah.
It was disgusting. It was terrifying. It was super well done in that moment. And so, like I said, contrasting with what I was talking about before, where I would have had a problem reading through the like squeezing all the air out of your lungs and trying to pull yourself through. That wasn't as bad to me. This part, worse I think for you, just based on our reactions in the moment. But I also did not enjoy. It was a lot.
Well, yeah, because I figured before we found out they were dead, I figured they were just the Jorian and Kiora were dead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Gonna be dead.
Yeah. And then two last quotes here.
But again,
Sorry.
we knew that Kiora doesn't die.
Kiora
right?
doesn't, but Jorian
But
could have.
still, Yeah.
Jorian could have absolutely died here. And so then, like, if you need this recap, Jorian ends up in this space on top of the dead bodies of the Eldrazi spawn that were dropped there by goblins. The goblins were the ones who had gotten the Bident. She is able to fight off the goblins and deal with them to the point where she's able to get the Bident back. But now she is severely injured.
Right.
So now she's just laying on the ground, at least one broken rib, possibly more, among other things. So she's just kind of laying there with the Bident in hand, she being Jorian, by the way, if that was a question. And just like, well, Kiora's not coming because she can't make it through that tight spot, so I'm screwed, I'm just here. I have to try to make it back to Kiora, but I just can't. I can't even breathe.
Right.
And so the quote was, here she was. She had retreated into a deep hole, waiting for the end.
Right.
Which is exactly what she had talked about earlier in the story, which she had decided not to do,
Right.
and instead went with Kiora, where she ended up in a deep hole waiting for the end, right? So
it's a bookending, bookends to the story, and it's perfect though because it's very much when you're in a situation where you have no hope. You very much feel like that's what you want to do until you're there in it.
Yeah.
And then that sucks worse. So, it's cool that they showed her wanting to kind of be there. Stopping herself from doing that, going and doing a whole bunch of other stuff, and then winding up in that situation and realizing, I never want to be here again. Right? So,
Yeah. And then of course, then we all know, then Jorian just dies and the story's over and Thassa never gets her Bident again. And by Thassa, I mean Kiora. Obviously, I'm kidding. Kiora then shows up, having squeezed through that tiny space that she couldn't do.
Right.
She finally did it. She got there. They get the Bident, or Kiora gets the Bident back.
And arguably that was because then she was focused on, I need to get to Jorian.
Maybe. I don't know that Jorian expressed that she was dying or stuck.
No, but
So
she wouldn't need to in that kind of situation.
I guess, yeah. It's just, there was a lot of back and forth, which kind of didn't really amount to much, but there was a little bit of back and forth of like, Kiora constantly yelling, but Jorian not responding because she felt like Eldrazi were nearby.
Right.
And then...
But then she didn't respond and say, shh.
Yeah. And then Jorian speaking and Kiora not responding later on. So, like, there was a little bit of that back and forth that I felt like wasn't necessary and didn't really go anywhere. Where they were like, now it was Jorian's turn to be speak and not be responded to.
Right.
And it was like, what? Okay, sure, I guess that works.
Maybe that was another thing they were trying to bookend in some kind of capacity, but it fell short of,
It was very quick.
Seeming useful.
Yeah. And then, so, as I implied, Kiora shows up, gets the Bident from Jorian, and then saves the both of them, right? Doesn't just leave her there. She's like, all right, let's get out of here. And so, the last quote that you had me write down, Kiora had suffered the minuscule to reclaim her dominion over the vast.
Yeah. What a cool quote that is.
It's really good. Really good. Because, honestly, like, it's like anything else in life, right? How many times, I've heard this a million times myself, and I imagine many people have, where you look at a task that you have to accomplish. Maybe it's something like a chore around your house or going out to run an errand or something, and you're just like, oh my god, this is going to take forever, I don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. And you just like build it up in your head and build it up and build it up and build it up and build it up. And then like a month goes by or something, right? Depending on what the task is. It could be that a week goes by and that's incredible. Or it could be a month or 2 months or whatever. And then when you finally are like, okay, something, maybe it's gotten worse. Like there was something in your home that was slightly broken and you're like, I'll fix it later. I'll fix it later. Because it's a lot of work and I don't want to do it. And now it's broken more. And so like there's a leak in your house or something. So now you really have to fix it, right? You're like forced to. Something like that.
Or meanwhile, like you had to deal the whole time with like your workarounds of like of like dealing with the fact that it's broken, which in that case just adds up to be like way worse than actually fixing it.
Well, and so sure enough, when you get to the point of actually fixing it, it took you like
15 minutes.
even an hour. Like, if you waited a month to do something and it took you an hour, like, was it really worth waiting that long for it? No, it wasn't. And yet, raise your hand if it's happened to you. All the time. But it still is like, if you suffer the minuscule, you can reclaim your dominion over the vast. It can vastly improve your life to take care of that little thing. And yet you're going to put it off, and you're going to put it off because you're like, this is going to suck. I'm going to hate every second of it. And then it really doesn't suck at all. or it sucks, but it sucks for such a short period of time that, like, in the grand scheme of things, was it worth wasting all that energy, that mental energy on it? No.
To avoid it.
That's what I mean, yes. To avoid it, to work around it. Yes,
to
yes.
avoid it.
Yes. And to worry about it, too.
Right.
To sit there, I really got to do that. Oh, God, but it's going to suck. Oh, and then get distracted by something else, right? And even as I sit here saying it, I know I'm going to do that tomorrow or the day after. You know what I mean? Like, it's just going to happen again very soon. And so, like, that is, I think that's why that quote is so good.
Okay.
Because all she had to do was squeeze through that hole, which sucked, but it only sucked for a very short period of time. And then once she got to the other side, she had her Biden back and could literally control the ocean. Mm-hmm. But all she had to do was squeeze through a tight hole.
I mean, to me, it means more like the quote that we already had, where, you know, Jorian's like, you know, she fought a god and stole their weapon, and yet she can't squeeze through this cavern area with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's too hard for her.
Yeah, she literally went one-on-one with Thassa.
Right.
On Thassa's home plane, and still made it out with Thassa's weapon, but yet can't squeeze through a hole. No, that's a very good point.
So this line is just saying, like, in my mind, it's just saying, like, she suffered through this thing that she really thought she could not do. And she made it out alive. Got her Biden back. The Biden. It isn't hers. And now she's just as fucking powerful as she always was.
Yep.
Just because that thing was hard for her doesn't mean she's not Kiora, the woman who went and battled Thassa and stole the Biden.
True.
And then, you know, can control the sea with it.
Yeah. So, hey.
I mean, it arguably means less now. Because all of those large sea creatures that were almost themselves gods, right, are now dead as a result of her having done that. Poorly.
Yeah. And so she was beaten mentally and physically after that last confrontation with the Eldrazi, with the Titans, because she was like, well, cocky as anything, like, well, I'm going to bring up these guys and they're going to ruin you. And then she, like, and if I recall correctly, it literally was that Kozilek looked past her. She was nothing to Kozilek, even after having brought forth all of these sea creatures and giant krakens and Lorthos, who was like this ancient being, and it was nothing. Kozilek ruined Lorthos, dropped Lorthos in the water. All the other sea creatures meant nothing, and then who was Kiora to Kozilek? Literal nothing.
Right, well, I mean...
Less than an ant to us, right? Less than that.
But it wasn't that, right? Because it was more... Kozilek just is. Kozilek didn't make a conscious decision to think of Kiora as less than how she thinks of herself.
Absolutely true.
Kozilek just is. If you're in its way, you're in its way. And if you're not, you're not.
Yeah, I think Kiora...
The end.
You're right. I think Kiora expected, like, well, I'm putting up this fight, and so you're gonna notice me because I have put this roadblock in front of you. And, one, you're right. That roadblock was in front of Kozilek, so it no longer made that roadblock in front of itself.
Right.
But it did not care to think about how that roadblock came to be in front of it. He just killed it. And got rid of it. Exactly.
Why would it?
But to Kiora, it was like, well, I did it, so you should be afraid of me.
Yes, because she was very falsely entitled and just, thinking she was hot shit when she wasn't.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know what else to say. She... Like you said, she was very cocky, and there was no reason for it at all.
Yep.
Because...
Well, as far as she was concerned, she'd just taken down a god. And at least a god, and by taken down, I mean she had embarrassed a god, right? She had taken the god's weapon and absconded with it, where the god cannot get it, even though Thassa is a god. Thassa cannot planeswalk like Kiora can. And so Kiora had that leg up on Thassa immediately because of the fact that she can planeswalk. She's on another plane.
She can just leave.
She's safe
with
now.
The weapon,
right?
And Thassa cannot follow.
Exactly. No matter how godly she is, which Kiora then thinks that she is better than a god.
That's not what that means.
I agree with you, but that's what Kiora thought, right?
My point. My point exactly.
So.
If you think you're better than anyone, you will learn you're wrong. That's a fact. I don't know what else to say.
So, obviously, that is the end of this particular story. As I implied, over the next couple of weeks we are hoping to be able to finish the Battle for Zendikar Oath of the Gatewatch stories. I should have said it at the top. Maybe it will have been up there at the top. But we do have a playlist of all of these videos that we've done for Battle for Zendikar Oath of the Gatewatch. We have all our jar videos, obviously, but if you want specifically Battle for Zendikar Oath of the Gatewatch, if you want to follow along at home, if you will, and go through all these stories, there were a lot of them, fair warning. But there is a playlist. It should have been linked up at the top, but maybe I'll link it at the end here as well, when the things pop up over our faces and whatnot. Either way, but yes, as a reminder, while you are here before the video ends, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. You get those notifications whenever any of our videos come out, including more of these videos in the coming weeks, as well as whenever we go live every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, right here, as well as you can check out Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All, links in the description down below. You can check us out on our socials as well, Facebook and Twitter, also linked down below, so definitely check that out also. Anything else for this story? I thought so as well. So, thank you all so very much for being here. As I implied, as we both implied, we would love to hear any and all thoughts that you might have. Do you agree with the things that we said? Do you disagree? Is there something about this story that you loved that we didn't talk about, or that you did not love that we didn't talk about? We want to hear from you. That is what the comments down below are for. Anything and everything that you want to talk about, leave it down below. We really, really appreciate it.
Right, yeah. And I talked about Ari Levitch and liking Ari Levitch as an author and thinking that this story maybe wasn't what I expected of Ari Levitch. So, I don't know. If you want to leave your favorite Ari Levitch story
Sure.
in the comments.
Why not?
That'd be cool too.
There have been other Ari Levitch stories in Battle for Zendikar / Oath of the Gatewatch as well. So absolutely you can do that.
Yeah, I'd love
Please
to
do.
hear that. So.
Now, I'm going to do this slightly differently because returning to reviewing these stories and returning to a set of stories that we didn't quite get to finish because we got very distracted by a lot of other stories from the modern era that we were reviewing, is a great way for us to come back to all of you as we show off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
I think it worked, right? Kind of worked.
Yeah.
So, thank you all once again so very much for being here. I really hope everybody enjoyed. We really hope everybody enjoyed. And, For now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.